Game 1 at home, a 10-point favorite. I don't think any of us expected it to go down that way, especially when you don't have the ball with less than 10 seconds to go. They somehow force overtime and get the win, Michael. An impressive closeout performance for Boston, despite maybe a start that we didn't expect.
Yeah, what was I wonder, you know how they have that percentage of winning the game, right?
2.7.
They do it in football. Was it that was that high, really?
A 2.7% chance.
Boy, for a girl that didn't have her computer working, that's an amazing that you had that stat at the top of your head. That's just, I marvel. I mean, it's unbelievable. I don't know how you do it.
I may or may not have heard that on my drive into work today, but there you go.
Oh, well, you heard it. I didn't, so that's good for you. I mean, think about that. I mean, I think that's high. Don't you think that one's a high one, too?
I do, but I mean,
you got to. I mean, I don't know how you lose it. I mean, those are ones, and give Carlisle credit. I mean, he stood up for it. But I think, to me, more than anything, the Pacers made a statement. Like, they're not pushover Pacers, right? I think that they're here to play. They match up. They don't play great defense. But, for all the talk that Boston can play great defense, I didn't see them playing great defense last night either. I mean, it wasn't like, oh, my God, they made critical plays. I mean, the shot that Brown makes from the corner is an incredible shot. How many times do you think he's going to make that with somebody in his face?
Yeah. Well, when the guy has his hands behind his back, that's going to give you a better opportunity. And I think that's the point, too. And a lot of the conversation is, why don't you foul there? Even LeBron James was tweeting after the game. That's why when you guys ask me up 3 if I'm fouling every time. And so, it's an interesting situation there. You mentioned Rick Carlisle taking responsibility, the Pacers head coach, after the game. Tyrese Halliburton did as well. Here's him on the podium.
That's not him. Us as players, we got to do a better job. I had 2 bad turnovers that I feel like cost us the game, one in fourth and one in overtime. So, I understand he's protecting us, protecting, me as well. But I'll take that more than he should. I got to be better, and I will be better in game 2, and we'll respond the right way.
I mean, he's right. He does have to be better. Those 2 turnovers you can't have, but it also would have helped if you didn't have the 20 turnovers prior to that in the game as well. Like, that was a consistent theme throughout the game.
No question. Now, and you could say, well, it's the Celtics. I think a lot of those were unforced turnovers. I think they were more mistakes than it was. My perception was it wasn't that Boston's swarming defense created these turnovers, because at the end of the day, I mean, they still shot 53% from the field. You have the 22 turnovers and you're sitting there in the game, right? And they had 10 offensive rebounds. I mean, all we talked about was how they were going to, they had a hard time they got dominated by the Knicks on the glass. They out-rebounded the Celtics 44-43 in the game. So, like, all this talk that the Pacers are just going to be pushed over, I think is gone. I really do. And, look, let's face it. I mean, the Knicks used 8 guys, I mean, the players that they had to play, they had high minutes in their game. I mean, this was not an easy game for them. And Brown makes the only 3-pointer that he made all day, and it was the most critical shot he made.
And Michael, I agree with you. Like, this in my mind was proof that this series has potential to be a dogfight, that maybe it does go 6. Maybe if they're winning at home, if they can steal one on the, like, there's all these questions that raise up in your mind now about the Indiana Pacers. But then I'm sure there's also the other side of the coin here where you say, was this their chance? Like, did they miss their opportunity not being able to close out this game, and how will that affect them moving forward? And I know this is a conversation we can dive into a little bit later in about 30 minutes. Nick Whan of RotoWire NBA Radio on SiriusXM, he's going to join us. He has some different ways and bets that he wants to play on Boston here moving forward. So I am curious to hear what he took away from that game last night. As we look at the adjusted price, I mean, Boston goes from -900, -1,000 to -1,600 in the series right now. Yeah. In terms of the game coming up tomorrow, they were a 10-point favorite last night. The adjustment is only that they're a 9-point favorite now in game 2. So it's, in terms of the market, things are just continuing to buy in on Boston despite the performance on Indiana.
Well, remember, you could have got Indiana at a tremendous price at down 2-love to the Knicks, right? I mean, and when the Knicks won Game 5 and they had a chance to close it out, right? In Game 6, there was a tremendous price for the Pacers there. Even in Game 7 against the Knicks, the Pacers were underdogs and people were betting the Knicks. I mean, the Pacers, I don't think the betting market is going to give them their due at all. They're a different team with Siakam. Clearly they are. And so their numbers are a little bit skewed, just like the Dallas Mavericks are a different team since the trading deadline, just like the Knicks were getting OJ Anunoby too. So I think you have to take that into effect. But look, you could see the confidence in the players' faces. It was the same confidence I saw in the first game against the Knicks. I said, hey, look, they know they could play. They went out and lost the next game to the Knicks. Now, they had them close, and they let that game slip away. But I think they're resilient. I really do. This isn't the first time they've had a game slip away. We've seen this before. The Knicks let a game slip away when they didn't foul at the three-point line. Remember that? Yeah. And so you learn from them, you move on, and I think the quicker you can do that. Now, can the Knicks, can the Pacers continue to shoot at 53%? I think that's the question we have to ask ourselves.
Yeah, back-to-back great shooting performances from Indiana, no question about it. And tonight, of course, we're kicking off the Western Conference Final as well. The Timberwolves at home laying 4.5 against the Mavs, total 207. But we'll talk about that game again in just a little bit. Where I want to go here, Michael, is what's on Michael's mind for this Wednesday. And it's an interesting conversation you wrote about in your column up this week, earlier this morning at VSiN.com, called The Interim Coach Dilemma. What's on your mind as it pertains to Raiders head coach Antonio Pierce?
I was doing some research, and I came across some stats about interim coaches, and it reflected me on a story that I knew of whenever you go down this interim coach. And I've been part of organizations that have had interim coaches, and it's really very challenging. It's the substitute teacher problem, right? Teacher's out today, substitute comes in, okay, it's a day off for everybody. It's a little bit like that in the NFL. And so when Marty Schottenheimer in 1984 became the head coach of the Cleveland Browns, he demanded that either Art Modell give him a 4-year contract or he could have somebody else be his interim coach. He wasn't going to go through it all. Modell acquiesced. The players knew it. They responded. Went 4-4 over the second half of the season after starting 1-7. One of those losses came in overtime. Really turned the team around. The next year, make the playoffs, getting better. Antonio Pierce comes in, and takes over a team in the last 9 games, and he's fighting for his job, right? And so he's an ex-player. He does things that make the players kind of buy in. He does it, and they win. They go 5-4, play really good defense in 4 of those 5 wins tremendously. Don't have much offense. But my point of the column is, of the 46 guys, Stormy, that have been named interim coaches from 2000 to last year, 12 of them went on to become full-time coaches at their team. There's really only been 2 that have been successful. We saw Doug Marrone in Jacksonville have some modest success. And then the Clapper, my man Jason Garrett, went 9 years in Dallas. And he's probably the most successful interim coach of all. And he had 1 good year, 1 bad year, 1 good year, 1 bad year. But he's the most successful of the interim because when you become an interim coach, you have to win over the locker room. You have to get everybody behind you. When you become the full-time coach, you got to change your demeanor, and through that change becomes a little bit of a problem. Look, I'm not making it up. History shows it, right? History shows it. And then add in fairness to Pierce, the Raiders drafting is one of the most untold stories that has gone on since really Mark Davis took over. It's been a disaster drafting. And it's not just Gruden's fault. It's Jack Del Rio's drafting. It's Reggie McKenzie. It goes on to Josh McDaniels. It's not been a very cohesive farm system, if you will.
Yeah, the history of first-round picks is not been great.
No, they've been ugly. And so you're not only are you an interim coach, you're taking over a team that doesn't have good defensive line, but where else are they good? Now, I'm told, and I would love to hear your commentary on this, that people are betting them on the over 6.5. Why?
I think that speaking of believing the hype, which is a segment we're going to do here coming up in a few minutes, is I think that they are buying what Antonio Pierce is selling and the way that the defense did step up. And you bring in Christian Wilkins to fortify that side of the board alongside that side of the ball alongside Max Crosby. If you are able to get decent enough quarterback play, there are weapons in Devontae Adams and go on down the list. So I wouldn't do it. I understand why people would, though. Minus 135, the price there, so it is played to the over. I just keep on going back to, Michael, We know that he is a hype man. Antonio Pierce is the quote-unquote player's coach. The way he was received by the team, I think, paired with the Rich Bisaccia of it all and how much people were pushing for him to get the job and he didn't, left Mark Davis like very little choice in the matter of what he was going to do. Like, it had to be Antonio Pierce. Now it's just a matter of, is that going to work? And apparently some people believe they do. I don't know. I just feel like it's an uphill battle in the AFC West.
I do too. I think it's hard. And I do think, look, I do know this from having been in the league, that it's just like what's going to happen in New England. When one coach leaves, there is an uptick, but then that doesn't last very long, and the next season always becomes harder.
Yeah, I'm looking at a quote right here from the article. The uptick from change no longer applies, forcing Pierce to set his direction, establish his standard of excellence, and hold those accountable. So it's definitely something we're going to have to keep an eye on. I do think a good thing that's in his corner is he's got a couple of former ex-NFL head coaches that are on the coaching staff as well to help him navigate some of that. But speaking of the hype, do we believe it on these handful of teams? We'll get into it in a moment on the Lombardi Line. We're just getting started with Hour 2.
This is the Lombardi Line with former NFL executive Michael Lombardi. Now here is your host, Stormy Buonantony, on VSiN, the sports betting network.
You know, we here at VSiN and the Lombardi Line love to help you out. And right now we have an awesome offer that can do just that. Our annual subscription is usually $240, but if you subscribe right now, you can get it for $199. And you'll also get an extra 2 months for free. So that's 14 months of VSiN Pro access for less than 50 cents a day. And all you need to do to cash in is use our promo code for this show, Lombardi, Lombardi. With VSiN Pro, you'll gain instant access to our daily best bets with the leaderboard to see which VSiN expert has the hot hand, betting splits to show you where the money and bets are moving for every game, betting systems, premium analysis, and 24/7 video access. Visit VSiN.com/subscribe today to claim your 14 months of VSiN Pro for only $199. But you gotta use that code Lombardi. Alongside Michael Lombardi, Stormy Buonantony with you. Time to discuss if, with the hype train rolling for these NFL teams, if we want to hop on the train or take the risk of just jumping off and saying, sorry, Charlie, that's not going to happen. Let's start with the Dallas Cowboys, who maybe there's not the usual amount of hype around them, but because they are the Dallas Cowboys and they're America's team, they're being talked about more than just about any other team not named the Jets. So 3 straight 12-win seasons, Michael. Win total set at 10.5. Juice is actually on the under here, -120. Over is at even money. But are you believing the hype that in what feels like a Super Bowl or bust year, that things could happen for Dallas?
I'm not buying that hype. I have said this and have been on record. I thought they overachieved last year. Nobody wants to. It's like Mike McCarthy's like Tom Thibodeau. Nobody wants to give him credit for anything, right? Nobody, no matter what happens with the Knicks, it wasn't Thibodeau. It was something else, right? It was the water at the garden. It was the popcorn. You know, it's the same thing with Dallas. Dak has his best year, and it wasn't McCarthy. It had to be Kellen Moore's tutelage when he left. I don't know. But to me, the concerns about the offensive line, their inability to beat good teams, and who's going to help, who's going to cover on defense? Diggs last year missed all the season with ACL. He takes a lot of chances. How good are they on defense? Parsons' contract always worries you. CeeDee Lamb's contract always worries you. You know, and then you look, they open up on the road in Cleveland, you know, and if things don't go well, say they go to Cleveland and lose, come back and beat the Saints, right? And say they lose at home to Baltimore. Now they get to go play the Giants, Pittsburgh, and Detroit before. I mean, they have a chance to be 3-3, but 3-3 in Dallas is going to weigh heavy on you.
If you think you can get 3 of those wins, plus 190 in the wins in the first 5 games market that you saw on your screen a moment ago. But yeah, it's a team, Michael, that has so much pressure on them, and this was one of those things that I already knew the answer because we talked about it in hour 1. But I still had to tee it up, like see if maybe I could tie you in and buy you in on doing something else. You mentioned the lack of success against good teams. Another team that had that narrative about them is the Miami Dolphins. They had the number 1 offense in the NFL last year. They returned to Tagovailoa, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, added more talent, bringing in OBJ and Jonnu Smith. But can you believe in Tua and the hype around this team, especially when you take the defense into consideration. New DC and Anthony Weaver, no Christian Wilkins, at least 4 new starters on that side of the ball. Should we get on the hype train or off?
Well, I'm not on the hype train. I think the East isn't as good as it was last year. I still think Buffalo, because of Josh Allen, is the best team. But if you think they can get 3 wins, if they have Buffalo and Jacksonville at home, and they have Tennessee, and they go to Seattle and they go to New England. I mean, 3 wins at plus 180 is very doable here, don't you think?
Yeah.
I mean, 4 wins. I mean, they're going to beat New England. They should beat Jacksonville in the opener. We'll see. Or they should beat Buffalo. We'll see. But playing Buffalo on a Sunday night at home, you got a better chance for a Thursday. Go to Seattle. Probably be a hard game, but they have a 10-day rest, so that helps them. You got Tennessee at home. They're going to beat those, and then they got to go to New England. And I'm not sure New England's going to have a hard time. So I think they can win 3. I think plus 180 at 3 wins or plus. But I'm not buying them because I think as the schedule goes, they have Green Bay in November 28th, hard game. They got to go to Cleveland December 29th, cold. The Jets, January. They end up 2 games on the road in cold weather. You're not getting me. And in between those 2 games, before those 2 games, they have San Francisco at home and they have to go to Houston. You're not getting me there on that.
Yeah, so the win total is 9.5, juiced it to the over at minus 135. And with that in mind, if you're going to want that win total over, you're going to have to stockpile those wins early in the season. The good news is 8 of their first 11 games are against teams that missed the playoffs last year. But we've also seen under Mike McDaniel as their head coach that the Dolphins have struggled the back half of their schedule. They're 4-10 in December or later, including a pair of playoff losses to Kansas City and Buffalo. If they want to change the narrative, they have to beat good teams. And that goes back to a lot of our conversation that we've had about Miami last year and the way that things ultimately fell apart for them. Another team that has the hype train, and they did, quite frankly, going into last year, too, and lived up to it, if not exceeding some of the expectations, the Detroit Lions. They're coming off their first division title since 1993. They should have beat, as much as I'm happy that it didn't happen, they should have beat the 49ers in the NFC Championship. They're up 17 at halftime and can't hold on. They are rolling. This offseason reshaped their defense. They got their key pieces on offense re-signed. Should we be buying the hype that the Detroit Lions can not only get to another NFC title, but maybe win it this year?
I think they're good, and I think they're going to be improved. I think the first game of the year is going to be fascinating. I mean, the Rams coming, they open up with the Rams on Sunday night. Matthew Stafford back again, and we get a repeat playoff game. Yeah. We'll know the Rams will be really ready to play. But other than that, before they hit the bye, they got Tampa, Arizona, and Seattle. They can get 3 wins there. They could get 4 wins. Then they go to Dallas, Minnesota. I like the team. I think they've improved the areas that they needed to improve. Offensively, they helped, but they lost an offensive lineman. They were able to sign Kevin Zeitler back. But for me, the key has been their secondary, and they've improved in that area. And I think that's really going to make a huge difference for them.
The favorite in the wins in first 5 games is 3 as well, plus 175, 2 plus 250, 4 plus 300. I think they could get 3 wins out of that first 5. I guess the one at Dallas is kind of a big question mark since that's coming out of the bye, though. They should feel good about themselves there. But this is a 12-win team last year, tied for the second best record in the NFL. With the hype comes standalone games as well. If you look at their schedule big picture with their win total sitting at 10.5, 5 primetime games in 2024, including their annual Thanksgiving Day game against the Bears. But they lived up to it in primetime last year, 5-1 in primetime games last season, including the playoffs. Let's keep it in that division, in that realm. The Green Bay Packers, Jordan Love, prior to the Packers divisional round, lost to San Francisco last year, had a run of 21 touchdowns and just 1 interception. They won 7 and 9 games in that time to finish 9 and 8 on the year, secured a playoff win in Dallas in the wild card round. Love's already put himself in the conversation for a trendy MVP pick, and he'll certainly have the opportunity to do so head-to-head with some other really good quarterbacks of note. Are you believing the hype in Green Bay?
I am, because I think Hafley will make a difference defensively for him. I think he's going to help their defense improve. But that was the issue last year. And at the second half, look, at the beginning of the year, when you watch Green Bay, they were doing everything in their power to make sure that Love didn't beat them, right? They had no faith really in Love as a quarterback, but eventually he won them over. And I think the addition of Josh Jacobs, who can do a lot of things that Aaron Jones did, but he's a more power back if he's in shape. But the key to this team has got to be they have to improve their run defense. They've got to get better, and they've got to create turnovers. They should be able to pressure the passer at a higher rate. Last year, they were 31st in interceptions. They were 23rd in turnovers defensively. They couldn't stop the run. They're 28th in yards allowed on the ground, 23rd in yards per attempt, which is significant considering that 26th in the league in people trying to run the ball on them. I mean, people were running the ball on them because they knew they could. If they don't stop that, it's going to be a problem. And I think that ultimately is got to be something that they fix. Look, they lose on the road to the Giants, a horrible loss. They come back and lose to Tampa at home, another bad loss. And then they reel off 3 wins, Carolina, Minnesota, and Chicago, and they get in, and then they destroy Dallas. I think the momentum's with them.
A really potentially challenging stretch of the schedule coming out of the bye. They're at the Bears, who, if they end up being the team that people expect them to be, would be a challenge. But then you've got the 49ers, the Miami Dolphins, and the Lions all back to back to back. Teams who combined to go 35-11 last season. Win total for the Packers sitting 10.5. You are getting plus money, though, on the over if you think they can exceed expectations, if you're believing the hype. Last one here real quickly. Jim Harbaugh has exceeded expectations every stop that he has been at, turning around programs quickly. Are you believing the hype in L.A.?
Yeah, I am. I think, look, I believe this. One of the reasons I think the Raiders are going under is because I'm not sure about Pierce as a coach and Gardner Minshew. Then on this game, I'm because it's quarterback and head coach for me. I like Justin Herbert. I love Jim Harbaugh. Quarterback and coach, he's always improved the team, and I think he'll improve this team.
They struggled in the division last year, got swept by the Broncos, swept by the Chiefs, won one of those games against the Raiders. The other is the one that cost their head coach his job. Win total sitting at 8.5 for the Chargers. Juice to the over, -155. People are believing in what Jim Harbaugh can do from a culture standpoint and getting the most out of his players. We're going to hit the break. When we come back, turn our attention back to the NBA. The Eastern Conference Finals got started with a bang. Will we have similar fireworks in the West tonight? Nick Whan will join us coming up next.
This is the Lombardi Line with former NFL executive Michael Lombardi. Now here is your host, Stormy Buonantony, on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network.
In addition to watching and listening to VSiN, don't forget about all the amazing betting tools and content available each and every day at VSiN.com. We've got best bets from hosts and guests, betting splits, pro tips and trends. And right now on the homepage, VSiN senior NBA analyst JVT previewing the Eastern and Western Conference Finals. We've got daily write-ups in the NHL, MLB, WNBA, and plenty of NFL offseason content as well. Our own Michael Lombardi with a new column this morning and each and every week. Today, the interim coach dilemma. And if you missed any of our discussion breaking down the article at the top of the hour, guess where you can find the re-air? Also on VSiN.com. As we welcome you back to the Lombardi Line, Michael Lombardi and Stormy Buonantony with you. Speaking of the Eastern Conference and Western Conference Finals, though, let's get into a little NBA here with some help of our good friend Nick Whan, who joins the show now via the Progressive Guest Line, doing great work over there at RotoWire as a senior analyst, SiriusXM NBA host as well. Nick, the Indiana Pacers did something last night that has never been done in NBA playoff history in a bad way, losing a game up 10 with the up 3 with 10 seconds to go with the ball, with possession. How did it happen? What was your big takeaway from the end of the game?
Guys, 2 of the most unconscionable turnovers I can remember in that spot in an NBA playoff game. I mean, for Tyrese Haliburton and Aaron Nesmith to kind of miscommunicate with about 25 seconds left on the sideline, essentially just let the ball bounce out of bounds at a spot where, you know, at the very least, you're able to take off most of the remaining time. Boston maybe has to think about fouling at that point. Even if you take the clock down, you don't get a bucket. You know, Boston's in a really tough spot with only a handful of seconds left to try to get a desperation look. And after that, guys, you know, they turn it over. They get the stop they need. Incredible defense by Aaron Nesmith to make that a very difficult look at the rim for Derek White. They get the rebound, and they turn it over again. You cannot turn the ball over in that spot out of a timeout in an out-of-bounds situation. You get the ball in, you're getting fouled immediately. You make one free throw. The game is essentially over. And after that turnover, you kind of just, you watch enough basketball over the years, guys, as I'm sure you have, and you just kind of had that feeling in the back of your mind, like, oh boy, you can't keep giving a team like Boston this many opportunities. And then, of course, once that Jaylen Brown shot went in, you felt like it was Boston's game to win in overtime.
No question. So I want to ask you this. when you watched the game, was it Boston played poorly and Indiana played so well, or is Indiana going to be able to compete in 6 more games with Boston?
I think Indiana will be able to compete. I think the question is, and this is somewhat of an intangible, how much does a loss like this stick with you? I mean, Indiana knows what we know, that this may be their best chance to steal a game in Boston in this series. And they had this game won twice in the final 25 seconds, right? I mean, they had this game in their clutches. And to let that slip away, or to now be 1-0 Boston, I know Boston's already dropped 2 game 2s so far in these playoffs. It's hard to see that happening again. It felt like this was the kind of no-show spot that a lot of Celtics fans were worried about. So I think Indiana is not going to just completely lay down. I don't think Boston marches all over this team, but it's hard to imagine Indiana replicating this kind of shooting, right? I mean, it carried over essentially from what we saw in Game 7 against the Knicks on Sunday. They shot 67% from the field in that game. They were shooting 60% from the field in the first half last night, guys. I mean, that's like a 6-quarter stretch where you're essentially shooting 62, 63%. The Pacers were the best offense in the NBA for a reason. They do a great job generating open looks. That's just not sustainable against the number 1 defense in the NBA during the regular season. So I think the Pacers kind of had their night where the variance went in their direction, even though they fell behind 12-0 early on. Miles Turner essentially carried them through that first half. Tyrese Halliburton hit some huge shots. I just don't think you can rely on the offense being there to the degree that it was often for the rest of the series. So I like Boston in 4, Boston in 5. I think there's some decent prices out for both of those outcomes.
Well, yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Pacers 9-1, Celtics pretty unbettable at minus 1,600. Yeah. So you got to get creative. But so you think a sweep is in play and a 4-1 would be a good secondary option?
Yeah, I think both of those outcomes to me are most likely. I think a sweep is absolutely in play. Again, I think Boston's going to be very cognizant of the fact that, hey, we've won game 1 in every series so far. We've had the game 2 letdown. We're not letting that happen again. Yeah. And I don't know that Indiana is that much better of an opponent than the Cleveland Cavaliers, especially when they had Donovan Mitchell, or even the Miami Heat, who, of course, are the best coached team in the NBA and always give the Celtics trouble. It's technically the Eastern Conference Finals, but this is kind of a first-round type of matchup if you're Boston. And the other thing we have to remember is, as this series goes along, perhaps Kristaps Porzingis is back for Game 3 or Game 4. I don't think they need to bring him back. I don't think they need him to win this series, but it is a Boston team that, in theory, could get even more dangerous as the series progresses.
Let's shift our gears to Minneapolis, Minnesota, Dallas. Dallas, to me, is an outstanding defensive team. Do they match up? And what's your feeling on Max Kleber? Will he play in the series?
I would be a little bit skittish as far as Maxi Kleber goes. We will see. I think certainly Dallas would like to have that shooting threat out there, that rebounding threat. Kleber's one of those guys that, the numbers are rarely impressive, but I think he means more to this Dallas team specifically than he would for just about any other team in the NBA. And they trust him in big spots. I think they missed that shooting at times as the last series went along, even though they were able to win it. So the big question for me, guys, when it comes to Dallas is, can we continue to get the production out of PJ Washington and Derek Jones? Those are the 2 guys specifically that I thought really carried them in a lot of ways through the Oklahoma City series, right? PJ Washington had the series of his life. He's averaging like 4 threes per game over his last 6. He was fantastic closing out that series because we saw OKC essentially say, look, we're going to try everything we can to take Kyrie Irving out of the mix. We want to neutralize him as a scorer. If he wants to pass, if he wants to make the right basketball play, we'll live with that. But we are not going to let him give us 25 to 30 per night. I'm interested to see, do the Wolves take a page out of the Thunder playbook and say, this worked for the most part. If OKC had shot the ball better in that series, that was a winnable series for the Thunder. Did the Timberwolves take that same path and say, all right, we want to try to eliminate Kyrie Irving? Because I don't know if you could do that with Luka Doncic, but Kyrie's the type of player that, he doesn't have the size of Luka. He doesn't have the ball in his hands quite as often. You take him out, you force guys like Jones and PJ Washington to win you a Western Conference Finals series. To me, that's a tough pill to swallow if you're the Mavs.
The Timberwolves did take money right away in the series, but up to minus 170, as high as minus 190, but it did come back down to where it sits right now. I've heard some people mention the regular season series, and the Mavs obviously lost that 3 games to 1. But how much do you just have to throw that out altogether? Because all the games were prior to the trade deadline, and Luka and Kyrie only played together in one of those games, I believe. So how much do you just have to eliminate the regular season series from your handicap altogether?
I think you pretty much toss it out, guys. Like you said, Luka and Kyrie were only together for one of those. I think Kyrie missed the other 2. And Dallas, more than any other team in the NBA, you could draw a line of demarcation before the trade deadline and after the trade deadline. No team, made more drastic moves. I think they were one of, really only 2 or 3 teams that were truly aggressive at the deadline and met their needs, right? I mean, they needed help in terms of big men, and they went out and got, in my opinion, the best big man available for the price in Daniel Gafford, just stealing him away from Washington and then grabbing PJ Washington, who was always one of those guys where you're like, I kind of like the numbers. I like what we see from him, but he's stuck on this Charlotte team that's not winning any games. Is it empty? Is it not? He's a legit guy. I think he has been one of the biggest winners down the stretch, not only after the deadline, but into the postseason. He has proven that he is a big-time playoff rotation player. So I don't really factor that in too much. And at the same time, I think the question for Minnesota is, like, how much of a boost do we give the Timberwolves for beating the Nuggets specifically in round 2? Because I think it's a little easy to fall into this trap of, wow, they've slayed the dragon. They've faced their toughest test in round 2. Everything after that should be gravy.
How about, let's shift gears real quick into football. Is there any over-under totals on win totals that you saw once the schedule was released that you thought to yourself, wow, that looks like a really tempting bet?
Yeah, one that I'm looking at right now is the LA Rams at 8.5. I know that's the number over at the Circus Sportsbook right now. I think we're getting a really nice number for a team that won 10 games a year ago and, very easily could have won 11 because one of their losses was a Brett Rippon start that they essentially threw away. Now, the loss of Aaron Donald, that's impossible to replace, right? But I think the Rams had one of their best drafts in years by default because they've had so few picks. They haven't had a first-round pick since 2016. I thought they addressed the holes that they needed to address in the draft. They added another running back weapon to supplement Kyren Williams. I think the big if for the Rams, and the reason that I think this number would be higher if you eliminated this, is the injuries, right? Cooper Kupp, can he stay healthy? Matthew Stafford, can he stay healthy? If both of those guys stay relatively healthy, if they play close to a full season, I think this is a 10 or even an 11-win team. I'm really high on the Rams.
Sorry to bounce around on you with we're up against time here, but I know you do have a play tonight. Any best bet or prop that you want to make sure you get out there?
So first of all, if you're looking for an exact result in this series, I do like Minnesota in 6. I think that's the best value. You can get that at 5-1 right now over at DraftKings. As far as tonight goes, I'll just rapid fire through a couple. I do actually like Kyrie Irving over 21.5 points. We're going to need to see how they play him, but this number is down a good 3-4 points from where it was at the beginning of round 2. I think there is a built-in discount on Kyrie. I like PJ Washington to keep it going over 2.5 threes for him. You're getting that at plus 150, 3.9 makes per game over his last 7. Minnesota, they defend the 3-point line well, but they're still surrendering 15, 16 wide open threes per game, according to NBA.com/stats. So it's about middle of the pack for the playoffs. So those are the 2 props I like tonight, guys.
Nick, keep up the great work. We so appreciate your time.
Great job, Nick.
Hey, anytime, guys.
Thanks
for
much.
having me.
Nick Whan doing an awesome job, RotoWire senior analyst, also NBA radio, Sirius XM. You can follow him at Whalen on X, but the L is a 1. Number 1 in your Twitter handle, number 1 in our hearts. We're going to hit the break, wrapping things up on the other side. Lombardi Line on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network.
This is the Lombardi Line with former NFL executive Michael Lombardi. Now here is your host, Stormy Buonantony, on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network.
We're so close to crowning an NBA champ, and with the action heating up on the court, it's even hotter at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. If you're new to DraftKings, listen up. New customers can get a no-sweat bet up to $1,500. Just deposit at least $5, and you'll get a bonus bet back equal to your first bet if it doesn't hit. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use the code VSiN. The crown is yours. If you missed any of our breakdown last segment with NBA Sirius XM radio host Nick Whan, he did a full breakdown on his thoughts for both the Eastern and Western Conference Finals. Make sure you check that out after the show. Download in podcast form wherever you get your podcasts or on VSiN.com. And while you're at VSiN.com, check out our pro tips because that's what we're getting into right now. Every single show here at VSiN does them one a day, each show searchable by show and by sport. But today's betting tip goes back to the article that you wrote today about interim coaches, Michael, and how over the last 24 years, 46 coaches have had an interim label, 12 were promoted to the full-time head coach, but only 2 were successful, and why that is something to take into account this year with Antonio Pierce earning the job in Vegas.
And you have to understand the dynamics. This is not a negative towards Antonio Pierce. This is the reality of the position, right? You get the job because you manage the ship. It was a great line when Rick Venturi was the interim coach of the Baltimore Colts. His owner, Bob Irsay, then said to him, just get the ship back into port. That's all we need you to do. And so that's usually what it is. We just got to get the ship back to port. And so we kind of know this is a mess, but we'll clean it up when we get there. And so you make a lot of concessions. The next year, you can't go with those concessions. You have to change dramatically on who you are because you have something bigger. You're not filling in. You're not a substitute teacher. And those changes can rub players the wrong way. It can change a different dynamic. And the momentum from one season to the next is hard to maintain. It really is. And then when you look, they don't have a quarterback. Like, you're not going to win games like they did. I mean, look, they completed 9 passes against the Chiefs. They got shut out by the Minnesota Vikings last year, right? They didn't, and Gardner Minshew isn't going to resolve those issues. It's going to be a challenge. They're going to have to win games with defense and the running game, and they let their best running back walk away. Zaire White's a good player, don't get me wrong, but now, he wasn't as good as Josh Jacobs was 2 years ago. So a lot of has to come into order for the Raiders. I just think in this division, I mean, everybody thinks Denver's the worst team. I don't. I think the Raiders have the biggest challenge. And again, it's not Pierce. It goes back to the drafting and the selections and all the things that they have missed on over time.
Yeah, they call it an interim bump in season for a reason. Like there is a bump because there's a change in energy, and Antonio Pierce is a great energy guy, but we're going to find out this season how he is as a head coach, and it's a very, very different role to your point, and the talent level that you talk about the Chargers, right, and the coaching turnover they have, and how you're excited about them because of the coach-quarterback combo. What do we have there with the Raiders?
Right.
Like Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell. We don't know what Antonio Pierce is as a head coach yet. So it's a very different situation. I think the point is well taken there.
Yeah, no, and I think when you want to talk about what you have to do, Pierce's comments that Aiden O'Connell deserves the opportunity to be the starter is reflective of last year. Like, he does not. He didn't play good last year.
Yeah.
But he helped you get a job and become the head coach. But you have to divorce you. See, this is the example. He didn't really help you become the head coach. You can't go with him. Yeah. There's no way.
And I like conceptually the Mahomes rules, playing off Jordan rules. I think that's fun and it's a good mentality. But to say that you have the recipe for beating the Chiefs is a little bit silly to say. And I think that most people, when they heard that, agreed. But again, only time will tell. Win total for the Raiders sitting 6.5. It is time, Michael, to close out the show like we always do with a little Why Not Wednesday on a Wednesday afternoon. Let's roll it.
Uh-oh.
Question. Maybe a stupid one, but I'm just spitballing here.
Can it make you say why not?
That wasn't a stupid question.
It's time for Why Not Wednesday.
I mean, why not?
You know when they say it's so crazy it just might work?
We love that plus money, honey, but is it too crazy sometimes? We shall see. We had Nick Whan on the program a little bit ago. He's all in on the Celtics. He thinks they can get a sweep. He thinks at worst, based on the bets that he's placing, it's 4-1 in Boston's favor. Michael, 9-1 is the price on the Indiana Pacers to come back in the Eastern Conference Final. Could you say why not?
I could say why not. I'm not with Nick. When Nick almost stunned me last segment, when he said that this is going to be a sweep. I didn't see a team that was completely dominant of the other team. I just didn't see that, and I think you have to, like, when you watch the Heat play in Game 1 against the Celtics, you said, yep, they're the better teams. Cleveland, yep, they're the better team. I didn't get that sense. That's why I asked the question the first time, and he didn't get that sense from the question I asked, but then he went with the sweep, so maybe he knows a hell of a lot more than I do on that one.
He was talking more like the mental side of things, right? Like, how much will that loss, knowing you could have and should have won, impact them moving forward? I don't know. We've seen so many series where one game is not like the other, so only time will tell, but 9-1 against the price for the Indiana Pacers there. How about going in the Western Conference Finals here? Maybe that plus 145 price isn't enough on the Mavs, but if you like Dallas, could you say why not to Kyrie Irving to earning MVP in the Western Conference at 14-1?
Oh, I'm easy on that one. I mean, I've complained about Kyrie Irving numerous times about selfishness, about some weird things. But this is a different Kyrie Irving than we're used to. You just have to say it, right?
Yeah.
You got to stop talking about he's a different person, different player. I get all that, right? Now, let's not confuse it. The one thing, he's different personality. He's still an elite player, and he's one of the best one-on-one players in the league. And he can take over a game anytime he wants. And he's playing defense now, and he's playing. Look, I'm a Mavs fan. I am. I'm rooting for him. So, yeah, you can get me to say that one easily.
Hell of a rebrand from Brooklyn to Dallas for Kyrie Irving. But let's stick on that trend. Should they win the Western Conference, could you say why not for them to go on and win it all? 5-1 the price right now.
I mean, why not? Right, Stormy? Now you got 4 in a row. We're on a roll. There's 4 why nots for you. This is a record on a Wednesday.
Michael is not on board
with
the Celtics. I am vibing this.
And I'm not on board. I think the Mavericks are really good. I think that they've improved their defense. They do a great job of adjusting. Look, they've lost game 1 in every series, and they've come back to win. And they're good. And I think they believe Max Kleber will be back to play. So I'm going to go there.
Let's turn gears now to the National Football League. We talked a lot about the Pittsburgh Steelers earlier on in the program, and it seems bettors are split. You have them with the most people betting on them to go over their win total, and then the majority of tickets on them to go under their win total as well. What about 12 wins? Could they have a 12-win season? 8-1. Could they just soar high as ever, and Mike Tomlin gets the most out of this team with a fixed quarterback situation?
You're not getting me here. No way. No way. You're not getting a why not here. No, I think the North is too hard. I think the North is way too hard. And I think it's going to be a challenge, right? So, 12 wins is hard to come by. I think, to me, if they get to 10, that's a remarkable season. Anybody gets to 10 in the North, I think it's a remarkable season.
Yeah. The back end of that season's so brutal. It's a no shot instead of a why not for me there. We just had a lengthy talk about the Raiders and Antonio Pierce. For them to have the fewest wins in the regular season is 12-1. Could you see them being worse than even the Patriots and Panthers and the lower echelon teams?
I would put pizza money on it. I think it's a halfway why not. Yeah, for sure. Because, look, I think any team that's going to have the first pick of the draft, what is symbolic with the first pick in the draft? You don't have a quarterback. Every team that picks, rarely does a team have first pick in the draft that has a quarterback. Now, the Bears got it from Carolina, so that was and they didn't have a quarterback. Think about that, right? Yep. So, the reason you're picking first in the draft is because you don't have a quarterback, and the Raiders don't have an above-the-line starting quarterback. That's just what it is. You can have all the skill you want. You could have Parker and Myers and Bowers and Mayer, and you could have all. If you can't throw it to them, who's getting open?
Producer Elliot, why even throw this terrible one in here? Help me out. Aaron Rodgers to throw 5,000-plus yards in the regular season. It's 18-1. I'm just going to answer for you, Michael. That's a no for me, dog.
Thank you. No way. No way. Look, if you're throwing for 5,000 yards, you're never calling any runs. And if you want to not call any runs for a 41-year-old quarterback, you're not playing Madden here. We just can't call passes every play.
Yeah, he'd need a former Commanders offensive coordinator in order to have that opportunity. But he's never even come close to 5,000 yards in his career. What I would say, though, if you think Aaron Rodgers is going to have a successful season, he's going to get that arm going. He's 22-1 to lead the league in passing. You think Tua Tagovailoa last year, 4,624 yards for him when he led the league. So there are different ways to approach it at significantly better numbers. That's a wrap for us. He's Michael Lombardi. I'm Stormy Bonantoni. Keep it locked right here on VSiN. Sharp Money with Patrick Maher and the crew coming up next.